ではここで、引き続き後半といいますか、このまま引き続きお昼までまたお付き合いしていただきたいと思います。それでですね、ちょっと、私どもの方から確認としていろんな皆さん今日前半の部分でお話しした中で少しちょっと整理をして、先生方にお聞きしたいことがあります。それはですね、一般狩猟者とプロフェッショナルという言葉が出てきました。それで、どの国でも起こることだと思うんですけども、例を挙げさせていただくと、例えばアーバンディアとかアーバンワイルドボアとかアーバンベア、北海道の場合はアーバンベアというものが実際に地下鉄から歩いて5分ぐらいのところに出てきますので、駅から5分ぐらいのところにいますので、こういう場所は仮に管理を始めようと思った時、管理をする時に管理の主体が当然ながら一般狩猟者にはなりません。で、おそらくプロフェッショナルだろうということになります。ただ当然法律的に例えば発砲禁止区域だったり、いろんなところで活動が起こるわけです。でまず諸外国でこのような時にですね、誰が実施するのか、それと法的にその根拠が整備されているのかということを、先ほどちょっと法改正というお話ありましたのでお聞きしたいんですけども、そういう事例をちょっとご紹介いただければなと思うんですけども、事例をお持ちでしょうか。はい。
You mean outside special cases like the one you mentioned to us?
例えば、アクセスのいい場所っていうのは一般狩猟者に任せておくということが可能だと思います。ただしアクセスが悪くて国立公園の奥とか、逆に言うと、都市部のど真ん中とかっていうところは、少し法体制の中でも変わってきますので、そういう場所はどういうふうな、例えばヨーロッパでは、仮にですけど地下鉄の駅の横で発砲する権利を法的に認めているのかっていう。
No, absolutely. I mean, you're completely right. I mean, and this kind of example is very useful, in my opinion, just to draw a line that can separate duties of professional hunters and duty of hunters, simple hunters, so to say. In our system, professional hunters are employed by the government, either the national government or the provincial government. They are police in the broad sense, in the sense that they are entitled to stop people, to check cars, to check houses, and this sort of thing. And so these people are not the extension of gamekeeper. They are different people that are in charge of solving problems like you mentioned. I mean, urban wildlife causing problems. For instance, we had in the Alps and where I sometimes live, we have a reintroduced bear population that is doing very well, but is also starting to cause a lot of problems because, as in your case, come in small villages, try to enter in the gardens of people and so on. In that occasion, this sort of people is in charge of darting the bear and putting it away in the wilderness or in cages in the case of repeated problems. But I mean, this is, in my opinion, the main concept. You have the need to have this sort of people for special cases, but you need, at least in our system, to have a limited numbers of these people. Then, for the big problem, you must have a very big number of people available, and you cannot, I mean, we can't afford that on the government budget. They have to be simple hunters, if we decide to use this term, and they have to be organized by professional and or by technician working for the government. And these technicians have to be prepared at universities. And so more or less this is the logic chain we are used to follow in Italy, but also say in France or in other European countries. And this is also what I allow myself to suggest you. I mean, to build up a system in which you have simple hunters that are linked to a specific territory where they are asked to do something, and in change of this, they have the opportunity to hunt and to hunt a big amount of ungulate in general. In our case, a simple hunter in this system may have at disposal up to 6 or 7 deer per year to shot, either roe deer or fallow deer or red deer. So it's quite a lot. A wild boar hunter within a team of 50 persons can have 3 to 4 to 5 wild boar personally to shot. So I mean, it's not that small payback for their effort, but it is very important to have people that is connected to a particular territory. I was really interested, because it's so different from us, to hear from you all that you have to ask hunters to come in to solve problem. I mean, this would not happen in our case, not because we are better, but simply because hunters are very interested to solve the problems, and they will really they will be very ready to say, okay, we are volunteer to do this, because it's their chance to hunt, simply. So I mean, to build up a system in which these people can really manage the system on the long run. Let's say in special cases like urban bears or urban wild boar, or in the phase 1 of the Hokkaido story, you really need people that are different from simple hunter, because a simple hunter, at least in our case, would not accept, we discussed yesterday evening with Peter, we would not accept, say, to cull 500 deer in one night, because I mean it's something looking like a sort of mass slaughter by a big carnivore. But I am afraid to say it's something that you will have to do if you want to reduce in a very quick way the density of deer. So I mean, there are two logic categories and 2 categories of people that are completely different and with a different position within the framework of management.
Can I just talk about urban deer for a moment? We are very lucky or unlucky that we don't have bear and we only have very few wild boar. So the issues that we have in the UK, and I'm focusing on the UK, is about urban deer. And those of you that will be in Hokkaido tomorrow or in Sapporo tomorrow, I will show a presentation about where we are at the moment with urban deer. And the role of the professional, I said yesterday that the government employs probably 50, in England, 50 professional deer managers, that's all. And so we have a population of close to 60 million people living in large conurbations, in large cities, the same as we do here. And yet we have deer in the middle of those cities, or certainly on the edges. Now, for some reason, Professor Putman and I have just done a review across Europe about the issues of urban deer, and nowhere else in Europe do they see these deer as an issue, but we do in the UK. But 50 professionals are not going to be able to manage or to resolve the wildlife-human conflicts that we get in these cities. We know that 70,000 deer are hit on our roads each year by cars. About 10,000 of those are not killed. They're sort of lying at the side of the road in the same way as we saw that photograph of of a seeker in Sapporo. So somebody has to go and either dispatch that deer or rehabilitate it if that's the decision. And clearly 50 people around the whole of the country cannot do that. So for us, the recreational hunter actually does take on that role. And yes, there are issues about using firearms at the roadside, but the police, because they do not want to do it, but in some places they do, but in general the police don't want to do it, though they have the firearms. And so I will often, depending on where you live, but I used to quite often be asked by the police to go along and kill a deer in the middle of a high street or in the middle of on a motorway. And yes, there are problems, but they are confident with the level of training of our recreational hunters and the certification of our recreational hunters that they believe, the police and the general public believe, that the hunter is better placed to deal with an injured animal than, say, the policeman himself or some member of the public who comes along and hits it with a hammer to try and kill it. So they would rather we came along with a rifle or a shotgun or a pistol and shot the deer humanely. And again, it's that humane thing. And our hunters do that as a free service for the government. So the government is effectively getting the managers that it cannot afford to employ a free service from the hunters. And that gives the hunters much more esteem with the general public, I think, because they are solving a wildlife welfare issue as well as gaining from their hunting. I know that John would like to say something about bears and wild boar.
So we're talking about three different situations. One is the vehicle, injured animal. The second is wildlife that are inside a city and are causing an acute problem. And the third is the wildlife that's very close to the edge of the cities, and it's more of a chronic potential problem. And I can just give some examples from Sweden, for example. The traffic injured animals are actually the responsibility of the landowner that's closest to the land. So he will go and kill this animal, and then he gets the meat. The animals inside of the city are dealt with by the police. And then on the edge of the cities, there really is not a special mechanism for that. It's more of a normal hunting situation. If you go to Norway, in the city of Oslo, which is a very green city with lots of forests, they actually have hired a hunting team that goes out and they will deal with animals in the city too, but they hunt or cull or kill, I guess you'd say, animals at the edge to keep the numbers from going very high. They also have some local hunters that are sort of contact people that will kill wounded animals that the police contact. If you go to Montana, Montana has 1 million people, and it has 100 professionally trained game wardens that have a bachelor's degree and have a certain amount of legal authority. They are the ones who would be called to kill a traffic injured animal, or the biologist. When it comes to a situation inside the city, an acute situation, they would also, either the biologist or a game warden, come in, capture the animal, tranquilize it, for example, and deal with it if it's a danger to, or even sometimes shoot it if it's a danger for people. And I was talking about, what is our perspective of problem wildlife? I had a sabbatical year from my University of Norway, and I spent 6 months of this sabbatical in Bozeman, Montana. So I went home to Montana for a while. One morning I got up, opened the local newspaper, and there was this big picture of a black bear in a tree. And the story was, in this little city, there were 14 black bears in the middle of this, in the city. And they were in apple trees. And so the responsible wildlife agency had been out there and evaluated all of these, and the conclusion was that that they're just in there to eat the apples, and they'll leave when the apples are over. So it's not really a problem. Just be aware that there's bears walking around. But one of those was in a tree next to a primary school for small children, playground. So that bear was tranquilized and removed. So it was really amazing to see how the authorities made this a positive thing. You could see bears, it's nice, and they'll go, when the apples are done, they'll leave, and no problem. And it was actually no problem. That's impressed me a lot. When it comes to, deer building up around the cities, they often have special zones where you can only hunt. You maybe have to get a special permit to hunt there, but also only use shotguns, or of course in the United States you can use bow and arrows. So these are weapons that don't reach very far. So in those cases, rifles would be illegal, for example. So there's many different ways to deal with these situations. But it's very important that that people feel confident that the authorities can deal with these kinds of situations. So there has to be a mechanism that people know about, that people can contact, and they know that it will be dealt with quite quickly and effectively. And I can say that also in Bozeman, in this city we were living in, a moose got into the middle of town somehow. And it was so stressed that it died when it was, which happens sometimes if an animal is very, very stressed, and it gets this, it was supposed to be taken out of town, and they tranquilized it, and in this process it died. And the people were very, very angry about that. So it wasn't good to have the moose in, but they thought it was not so serious that the moose should die for that. So I was really quite amazed by these attitudes, which you wouldn't have had in Scandinavia.
はい、日本の場合は、今後、例えば森林施業に組み込んで鹿なりを管理していくとか、国立公園の中に植生タイプごとでまだいわゆるマネジメントユニットっていうのがはっきりと出来上がってはないと思うんですけども、ユニットは今後議論していけばいいと思うんですが、マネジメントユニットが出来上がって科学者なりが、環境収容量を計算してそのユニットの目標を設置することはおそらく可能なんだと思います。でその時に、今回は今アーバンディアとかアーバンベアという題で、挙げましたが、基本的に誰が実施するんだっていう、法的根拠が日本の場合はほとんどなくてですね、おまわりさんも出てくる時もあれば、札幌の場合は区政課という区民の安全を守る、担当者が出てきたりします。当然ながら専門家ではあるわけではないので、大体街中出てきたら伊吾田先生のところに電話がかかってくるっていうたり、いろんなそういう関係者のところに、赤松さんのところに電話がかかるとかっていうシステムになってしまってます。でそれを検討すると50しかイギリスにはいないんだっていう話 今ありましたけど日本50もいないですよねいやおそらくそのポテンシャルはあると思うんですけど、責任を持たせる50人とか責任を持たせる100人とかっていうの体制にもおそらくなってないと思います。それは法的根拠がないのかもしれないですし、行政的支援がの仕組みの中にそういう枠組みがないのかもしれません。今後はそういうのも作っていく必要があるのかなと思います。でぜひここでこういうことに関してフロアからもご意見をいただきたいんですけども、法的なこととか行政的なことでぜひご意見いただきたいんですが、いかがでしょうか。その前、はい。
I could tell you that Norway also did not have this structure until only a few years ago. So they have built a professional group of wardens that some are trained as biologists, have a master's degree, and some are also just very good local hunters that work for the government and to deal with these types of problems and also to generally police, be environmental policemen, let's say, for hunting issues, but also maybe we could call in a pollution case or something. But they've realized that they need this service and have taken responsibility and just very, very recently made this new agency. So you might be interested to contact the Norwegian authorities. But people look on the government as really helping in these kinds of issues. I think it's really important that people know that someone will deal with these kinds of issues.
じゃあどなたかぜひよろしくお願いし
ます。先ほどは法律の話がちょこちょこ出てますけど、富山大学で環境法をやっている高橋光彦と言いますけど、法的にいろいろ問題があるって話はよく現場の方とかハンターの方とか自然保護の方とかいろんな方から聞くんですが、私なんかの目から見ると多分その法理論的な問題というのとそうではなくて技術的なテクニカルな問題と分かれてくると思うんですね。それで、法の理念的なものからすればですね、現在の鳥獣護護法ないしは狩猟法ですねは自然保護の方から言えばですね、なんか取ることばっかり書いてるじゃないかっていう人もいるぐらいで、保護とか増殖のことも書いてあるけど確かに、ただ産業農林業とか産業生活との両立であるとか、結構その有害捕獲のこととかですね、取ることについても、それなりに、結構書いてはあるわけで、そういった意味ではですね、今例えば障害になっているような話、狩猟免許取れるのは20歳以上じゃなきゃいけないとか、あるいはその猟期がどうしても短いとか、春グマ猟をやるとすればどうしても猟期外になってしまうだとか、そういうのっていうのはテクニカルな問題なんですよね。でそれは別に猟期長くしたって狩猟免許15歳からやるって言ったって法理念的には別に何も変わりない。ただ今の規則とかを変えれば済む話なんですね。でそれはやる気の問題ですよね。だから行政なり立法者なりにそういうのが必要ですよっていうことを言っていかなきゃいけないんで、外国の事例とかも参考にはなるといえばなりますけど、あとは自分たちのやる気だと思うんですよね。ただ理念的には今の法でも結構できるよとは言いつつもですね、理念的な問題ももちろんありますよね。今ほどお話があったその行政が責任を持って鳥獣の管理どこまでやるんだっていうのはある意味理念的な話ですよね。ちゃんと行政が出てってそういうのを取らなきゃいけないんだっていう義務付けるのかどうかとか、そういうのは理念的な問題、警察力がどこまで及ぶのかとか、その理念的な問題、そういうのも考えていかなきゃいけないと思いますけど、であとさらにその先を言えばですね、マネジメントユニット作って昨日もちょっと質問した部分にかぶりますけど、いろんな計画作ったとしてもですね、じゃあその土地所有者との権利関係はどうなるんだという、現在の狩猟法だと 私有地の上に鳥獣保護区を作ることも当然可能であって、で鳥獣保護区の中では、実際にはあんまりケースはないと思いますけど、行政が、保護増殖のために、給水場を設けるとか、そういったなんか設備を設ける場合に土地所有者はそれを嫌だって言っても受任しなきゃいけないと、強制的にできるというのがありますけど、逆にじゃあその行政が私有地の中で、罠を仕掛けなきゃいけないっていう場合に所有者が拒否したらどうなるんだっていう、今の法律ではそれ受任義務ってないですよね。難しい問題が発生したりしますよね。そういうのは法の理念的な問題として処理していかなきゃいけないと思うんですが、答えになってないんですけど、そういった中でですね、いろいろと、整理して問題をですね、上げていくのがいいんじゃないかなと私は思いますけどね。
ご指摘の通りで、整備をやっぱりしっかり進めないとできひんことっていうのが結構多いなというのは常々思います。結局現在でその鳥獣保護区で捕獲をするとか何かになった時に、今実施している部隊っていうのは多くの場合が研究者だったりする、大学がやってたりとかっていうことが結構多いのが事実で、そこはやはり、法律の問題で、おっしゃる通り法律の問題ではなくてやる気の問題であり、昨日も結局最終的に小寺さんと伊吾田さんと鈴木先生と4人で同じ部屋で寝転びながら、最終的にはやる気ないんじゃねえかっていう話を4人で終わって、そのままやる気なく寝てしまったんですけどそういう結論にはやっぱ実はなってたんですね。その地域のやる気をどうやって上げていくかっていうことが結構大事なところだっていうことはまさに我々実はそういう話をしてたところです。はい。
私も北海道のエゾシカの管理に関わっているもので宇野と申しますが、ただちょっとそのやる気のところだけに話がいってしまうとですね、やはり問題があって、特に今の鳥獣法の中で一番私が問題だと思うのは、都道府県とか国の役割がですね、こう指針の中に書かれてるんですが、そのクマとかシカとかイノシシの管理を計画を立てる、それからモニタリングをやれ、それから市町村を支援しろっていうのは書いてあるんですけど、そのもの計画そのものを実行するところのやれって書いてないんですよ。都道府県の役割になってないので、だからそういうところの基本的な考え方がですね、もうちょっとちゃんと役割分担にならないと、じゃあ都道府県は計画だけ作るよと、でうまくいってなくてもモニタリングだけするよと、で実行の部分は何も担保されてないというところがあって、そこら辺の問題点をきちっとですね詰めていかなきゃいけないんだと思います。でいっそのことを都道府県がもう全責任を持てっていうぐらい明確にしてもらった方が、実は財源も取りやすくなるという、そういう問題点があると思います。で一つ実はお聞きしたいのは、先ほどのまでの議論の中でやっぱり選抜された狩猟者を指導する役割っていうか、マネージャーが人材がものすごく重要だということだと思うんですけど、そこら辺のその国と郡とかカウンティとか県と市町村のそのこう役割分担っていうか連携っていうのがすごく重要だと思うんですけど、その辺についてヨーロッパの事例っていうか何かサジェッションがあったらぜひお聞かせ願いたいんですが。
In our case, speaking about Italy, we have a quite simple system in the sense that my country is subdivided in 110 provinces. And the provinces are in charge of wildlife management. Each province has its own body of environmental police. Within this body, you have people that is specifically trained to deal with wildlife. So if you are in trouble with wildlife, you have just to call the local police, and they come and they try to solve the problem, even if the problem is, say, a deer, a bear, or whatever. Then within national park, we have specific bodies that are linked to the national parks. Some of them have a very long tradition because our first national park were formerly king hunting preserves. So what happened was that the king gamekeepers became national park rangers and it happened at the beginning of the 20th century. And so now this body has 100 years of history and another 100 years when they were simply king and keeper. And these people, again, are trained to solve problems, to make censuses and so on, and to solve problems with wildlife. They are very good in some cases in darting animals or catching animals with nets and this sort of thing. Each of them has their own specialization that is linked to the kind of wildlife they have to deal with. So basically, these are the two main elements that are linked to public administration that are in charge of dealing with these problems. And this is also implemented by some wildlife managers that are within provinces. Each province has its own office on wildlife management, and there are, generally speaking, between 1 and 3 or 4 wildlife managers. It depends from the size of the province, dealing with, in the case of one, everything. In the case of many, one is dealing with ungulates, one with small games, one with fish, and so on. And so this is the general structure. It's pretty simple, but it is useful because you have some fixed reference point for hunters and hunters association. For instance, the ungulate manager is in charge to check the censuses done by hunters. At the very beginning, they come out with the hunters and they train them to see how a drive have to be done, where and why, and all the system is controlled by them. They are the collector of results, and they are the person in charge of checking the real efficacy of the system. And this help us to collect on a provincial basis all the data on wildlife. We have very long-term record of, for instance, cull data. Recently, we have worked out, my group and myself, worked out a database of 27,000 chamois shot in 30 years on the Alps in a province, the Trento province. And this is very helpful also for science because, you got at disposal these big records that were collected in tens and tens of years. And generally speaking, the system is working, obviously, better in some places, not terribly good in other places, but the general structure, I would say it's working.
We said when we started that we should be looking for good examples and bad examples, or things that work and things that don't work. At the risk of upsetting my fellow countrymen, I think we would have to say in the UK that you would not want to adopt our system. My starting point, of course, is that deer belong to no one or wildlife belongs to nobody in the UK. And so the government is very clear that it will set the policy, and the policy is to have a sustainable deer population in England and Wales. But they don't define what sustainable is. So anybody that is sitting in this room will have their own definition of sustainable. And that means that we can all agree, but then as you were saying about implementing the plan, the fact that we all agree that it should be sustainable doesn't mean that we all agree on how we get there or even what it means. So, and the government has very clearly said that it is up to the landowners to decide what is appropriate in terms of sustainable deer management at a local level. And again, they don't define local level. So you could say that could be in a 10-kilometer square, it could be in a 50-kilometer square, and it takes no account of the range of the species that we're talking about. So from our point of view, I would say whatever model you go for in the future, don't go for the UK model.
Okay, I can describe 3 models. The Swedish model is one where the national government has management responsibility for wildlife in a general term. And what they do is they delegate this authority down. They have professional wildlife biologists, and then for the different species actually go down at different levels. These biologists do not, on the national level, do not conduct any surveys. And actually Sweden is very special because back in the middle 1800s, instead of establishing a wildlife authority, they contracted with the Hunters Association to collect census data. So the Hunters have association has built up its own organization and does have professionally trained people. And they deal with the hunters. They have the harvest statistics, for example, and also do some research on different census methods. There's a person in the Hunters Association who's also in the Bear Project that makes the census calculations from this data on bear DNA data. And then some of now of the authorities being delegated down to the counties, and of course when it comes to ungulates, it's delegated further down to landowner groups in what are called management districts, like moose management districts. And there the landowners cooperate together. Mostly in the law, I think, is like Norway, where if there is 1 or 2 landowners in this group that don't want to cooperate, that's too bad. They are forced to cooperate. When you go to Norway, it's a very similar system where the national government has responsibility and it delegates it down. But there the harvest records are collected actually by the National Statistics Institute, and some of this census data is collected on the national level, some on the county level. The hunters are not so much involved in Norway. In Montana, it's also a central system where the state of Montana has responsibility to manage on behalf of the people, because now it's the people's wildlife, and it's so it's all done centrally. There's 4, 5, or 7 regions, I mean, and there are. What did I calculate one time? I think there's a wildlife biologist for every 25,000 people in Montana. It's an enormous effort because it's so important for the society. And there's a trained wildlife biologist that they are local. They're placed out in the communities. So there are these 7 regional offices and the state office, but they put the wildlife biologists and also fisheries biologists out living with the people. And the state has responsibility for, and these wildlife biologists, they do the census work. And sometimes they cooperate with hunters. They have the day-to-day contact with the hunters and organizations and also landowners. It's a very good system because it makes this authority very close, and everybody knows who the biologist is because there's this system. The state has responsibility on all lands except for the First Nations, the Indian tribes. They have their own responsibility and their own trained biologists, and also the national parks, which also have their own trained people. And like I said, there was 100 game wardens. And I think, so these very different systems. I can say that in Montana, since the people own the wildlife, is when every year when there's new regulations for what the quota should be, what kind of changes should be, we would have, these regulations would be sent out to anyone who's interested. They would be written about in the newspapers, and we would have a public meeting at every town with more than 5,000 people. We would have a public meeting. Anyone who could come and say what they thought about it. And then the regulation proposals could be changed some. And then on one day, on a Saturday in February, they would have a public meeting in the capital city where anyone who came could say what they thought, for and against. And there was a politically appointed commission who makes the final decisions. And this meeting opened at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it lasts until the last person has said what they want to say. And then on Sunday, they make the decision. So it's actually quite a democratic process.